What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so we're getting into Thor. Well, it's technically not called Thor Reborn, but it might as well be. It's basically Odin's son going back to being in the role of Thor, which, I mean, it's cool, but I like Jane Foster as Thor. I mean, I miss Jane Foster as Thor. She was awesome. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever get her going back to being Thor again, but she was awesome as Thor, and I thought it was great storytelling. But this is Odin's son going back to being the character of himself. Now, what's happened here? The way this picks up is this is out in Thailand. Now, this is actually kind of interesting because technically speaking, this should be in Korea. And I'll explain why here in a second. But this starts off in Thailand, and it actually starts off with Thor having raided the Temple of Sidorak to steal something called the Warlocks Eye. Now, the Warlocks Eye is a very, very old artifact. This goes all the way back to Thor 131. And well, technically speaking, it's weird. Journey into Mystery in Thor. Anyway, it goes back to Thor 131 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The Warlock's Eye was an artifact that if a person used it, they could basically dominate the minds of others. Now, Marvel has a lot of artifacts like that, right? Like different things like that. Doctor Strange can do that. Telepaths can do that. That's one of the things I want you guys to keep in mind for future reference. When it comes to the Infinity Stones, they are unique in their own right in the sense of like there are only one set of Infinity Stones, but there's a lot of other objects out there that can do something akin to it or are sometimes equally dangerous. Like the Casket of Ancient Winters, the Crimson Bands, and the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. Depending on how you use them, they can actually be pretty damn dangerous. But Thor's raided the temple for the purpose of capturing the eye. And the reason why is because following the destruction of Asgardia, basically the rebuilt Asgard that Iron Man had made following the events of Siege, when Mangog had stormed the gates really of Asgardia and started, tearing everything up and basically destroyed the entire area, the weapons of Odin had essentially just like flung across the cosmos and traveled across to different realms, or not really realms, but different places across really the main Marvel universe proper. Now, there is an indication here it has traveled across the realms, but Thor can't see into those, and we'll find out why here in a second. But the Warlock's Eye is one of these objects. Now, the Warlock's Eye, if I remember correctly, was taken, it was discovered and then used against Odin unsuccessfully, and then Odin took it and kept it inside Asgard. That's the way things worked back then. It's one of the reasons why if you go watch like the first Thor movie or Thor 2, you'll see that Odin has like all these weapons gathered around his room. Those are weapons that he gained over the years by defeating various foes. It's not things that just always existed inside of Asgard. But with regards to the arrival, or I guess regards to the temple itself and why it should be in Korea, the reason for this is twofold. The first is that because of the fact that Thor had raided the temple, the cannibals, the servants of Sidorak, in turn call in their champion, who's a newly reformed Juggernaut. The other reason for this is because during the original Octessence, which is to say the various demons of other dimensions gathering together to see who was the strongest, the Crimson Gem, as it was created by Sidorak and left on Earth for some future person to find and become the Juggernaut, that happened in Korea. It didn't happen in Thailand. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Now, we can largely assume that like different temples were made over the years. I mean, we can sort of jump to that assumption, but the way it was originally done, the way it was covered in 8th Day Juggernaut, is there was only ever just one temple of Sidorak. There weren't multiple temples. But when you have Juggernaut showing up here, we end up finding out that when Cain Marko went back to being the servant of Sidorak, that he's more powerful now than he's ever been before. Now, a lot of that was because when Cain Marko originally gained the Crimson Gem, that it was just a fraction of Sidorak's powers. And those powers, the potency would wax and wane over the years. Of course, the most notable example, the strongest Juggernaut's ever been, was Tryon Juggernaut. But aside from that, this is basically him more in tune with Sidorak, being granted more power due to the fact that presumably Sidorak realized Juggernaut could leave at any point in time and simply didn't want him to. And so you end up having Thor, who's basically given a hammer by one of the dwarves, and then shows up and then goes to smash it on Juggernaut, and it doesn't work. The hammer goes to pieces. Remember, Mjolnir was thrown into the sun by Jane Foster. So as far as Jason Aaron's telling us, it's basically lost. Now, it won't be. Thor will discover it eventually. I mean, it's the nature of comics. Everything that changes goes back to being the same again. But this hammer doesn't work. It just kind of fractures on Juggernaut. And so in turn, where Juggernaut starts to like pelt Thor in turn calls back out to the dwarves again and says, give me more hammers. And they just bring like thousands of hammers crashing down onto Earth. So it's literally Thor fighting Juggernaut with thousands of hammers. And we don't initially see it all happen. In fact, we don't. We only see him pick up like one of the hammers and then use that hammer to like crush Juggernaut across the face, and then you just skip to the next scene, which is kind of disappointing because I would kind of want to see Thor fight Juggernaut with like 1,000 hammers, because like when he gets there, when he takes the eye and he gets back to the dwarves, he ends up telling him, yeah, I had to use them all. Like I had to use all the hammers, and so they've all been destroyed. I need more. which is kind of funny, but it's a little bit sad because again, like I would kind of wanted to see that. I mean, I know you guys do. Nobody ever watches Thor to see him talk. People like they read Thor comics, like they want to see Thor like smash and stuff. It's like the Incredible Hulk. People are just like, yeah, I want to see the Incredible Hulk smash things. I know how you guys are because I'm the same way. I'm the exact same way. But the fact remains that we end up having him basically travel to visit directly with Odin. And when he's talking to Odin, Odin actually asks about her. And of course, this is Odin referring to Jane Foster. And this is a bit of a change for his character. And it's interesting because Jane Foster had earned the respect of Odin at the end of the story arc, because when all the Asgardians failed, and in the moment of testing, when Odin was basically faced with Mangog, the one being in the entire Marvel universe that Odin is actually scared of, Jane Foster was the only one to stand up and rise to the challenge. And so basically she picked up the slack where Odin was weak, and that really earned some brownie points. It earned some respect from Odin. And so that's when he asked the question, do you know where she is? Because Odin is actually concerned about Jane Foster, which is a total change because Odin was a reflection of a portion of the fan base who were just like, no, Jane Foster does not need to be Thor. He was written to kind of be that way, or at least that seems to have been the case. And so now he's just kind of like, yeah, like what happened to her? But then you end up having Thor transition back to Midgard and in the Bronx, no less, and meet up with Jane Foster, only for us to find out that again, the War of Realms is still going on. So Malekith the Accursed, this warlord of the Dark Elves, is still like running across all the various realms and destroying everything that he can find, and literally just like just laying siege to everything. I mean, just annihilating everything that he can find. That's really all he's doing. And so we end up finding out that like a lot of these refugees, these various elves and dwarves and so on and so forth, who have fled from their realms, are being given safe passage in the Bronx. And not only that, Jane Foster is actually recovering from her cancer. So it's really basically Jason Aaron's way of saying she's not gone yet, which I'm very excited about. That makes me very, very happy. I'm very pleased to see that. But it's really kind of the aftermath of Asgard's destruction. You have like for example, Heimdall lost his eyes, so we can't see everything, meaning he could not see into the other realms and see how the realms are faring. The Bifrost Bridge is broken, so Thor can't go there. Asgard's basically cut off from everywhere except for Midgard. That's really the only place he can get to. And so we really have Jane Foster essentially tell Thor that the next weapon he's looking for is something called the Gem of Infinite Suns. And for the most part, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a gem that houses the power of 1,000 stars. The reason why it matters is if you go back and you read the old stories, the old Thor stories, there was a point where he was attacked with the Casket of Ancient Winters, which creates like infinite cold, and the Gem of Infinite Suns countered that. It's basically the yin and the yang to the Casket of Ancient Winters. It kind of exists, as yin and yang to each other. But tracking that down, again, it's just another weapon that was lost from Asgard, which Thor's trying to locate. Now, for the most part, it initially seems like busy work, right? It just kind of seems like, well, Thor's just kind of here doing things and tracking down weapons and so on and so forth. And it doesn't really seem like he serves a purpose. But this changes when Loki shows up here. When we basically find out that Thor has been taking all these weapons and like throwing them to a singular location, and well, really on a boat, and which is kind of cool to see Thor like partying on a yacht. But still, Loki showing up here, I like the way that Jason Aaron does this because Thor is immediately hostile to him, right? Because he's like, hey, look, you stabbed Freya in the back at the beginning of this whole thing, the start of the War of Realms, and it was a poison dagger, and Freya was unconscious and almost dead for quite some time. But again, the way that Jason Aaron has done this, he's been writing Loki in such a way to where it seems like there's actually something else going on. And Jason Aaron's been tight-lipped about it. Like, we have no idea. It's just there's something else happening here aside from Loki just turning against Freya and joining Malekith in the War of Realms. We don't know exactly what it is, but it seems like he's not entirely evil anymore. And so when he ends up basically telling Thor, he essentially tells him, look, you're going to have to go on a journey here. And this journey you're going to go on is going to locate one of the weapons you're looking for, but it's the weapon that will win the war. And so it's kind of cool because that entices Thor to a degree, enough for him to kind of stop and then ask the question, what are we talking about? And Loki says, well, you have to go on a journey and find out, and opens a portal and sends Thor off to another location. Now, the funny thing about this is Thor is just like, nope, I'm not going alone, and grabs Loki and drags him in. And Loki's just like, what are you doing, man? Like you're gonna mess up the spell. So it's kind of a funny moment between two brothers, but we end up finding out that where Loki has taken Thor to is essentially the realm of hell. But it's kind of crazy because when this happens, you end up having Hela, who shows up here and says, if you want to survive this place, you need to come with me. And the implication here is that Hela has lost control of her own realm. It's a pretty cool scenario. I mean, we do know what happens because there's also a few more issues, to get us caught up, but it is a cool scenario because it's basically like Hela's lost control of her own realm, or at least that seems to be the case. And basically she's there alongside Loki and Thor to really figure out like how in the heck to survive this whole thing. So it's kind of cool. And it's actually pretty interesting. And I'm curious to see what direction it goes in. But yet another part in this War of Realms, that's why I keep telling you guys, when Jason Aaron finishes his run on Thor, when he finally sits down the pen and says, we are now done, it's going to be probably the greatest run of Thor ever written. I mean, starting with the old like Thor God of Thunder with God Butcher running all the way up, because it goes that far back, running all the way up until now. It'll be one of the greatest runs of his character that was like ever told. It's actually pretty spectacular. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.